a lot of talk about the Jets' improvement on paper this offseason, which we were joking before we hit record that like you can't really improve on anything but on paper in the offseason. Like obviously, if you're gonna
Yeah.
improve, it's gonna be on paper. But we want to talk about just how much, or if they, in fact, have improved going into this season. Now, I think you and I are both on the side of the fence that the team has improved. And, Paul is going to talk in a second about his thoughts on the improvement of the roster. But to couch this and say, like, these are not all my feelings. Don't come at me as like a Jets hater. We're doing a Jets podcast. I obviously love the team. However, this is what I would say to play devil's advocate if I were an absolute Jets hater who wanted to, if I were like a Bills fan and I want to be like, the Jets did nothing this offseason, these would be my arguments.
There's a lot of Jets fans who are like this, so you don't even need to be a Bills fan. You just need to be one of those Jets fans.
Yes. But, I like rooting for the team, but anyways, here are all the hater arguments that I've collected. We signed an older left tackle with some injury history again, and are relying on him to be a stalwart in the offensive line. I personally think Moses over Becton is an improvement, no matter how you slice it. Becton was often injured, but again, you're relying on Morgan Moses, who is an older player than Becton. Obviously, Becton had injury concerns that didn't necessarily have to do with his age, but you're relying on Morgan Moses to be healthy. Again, that's something that even I'm trying to be a hater, and I'm like, that's an improvement. Hater, back to hater mode. Our big wide receiver addition is coming off a torn ACL, which, we expect him to be back early in the season, but like, who knows? And even without the ACL, Mike Williams has had a history of significant injuries. We're swapping one offensive guard we were hyped on signing at the time for another. Like when we signed Lakin, everyone was like, this is awesome. He was Pro Bowl caliber. In San Francisco, we're moving him to the same offense. Again, we think it's an improvement, but how much do we really know? We're coming back. We're counting on AVT, who's coming off back-to-back season-ending injuries. And this year, they finally did what everyone was clamoring for and signing a better quality backup. But in reality, if we're talking about the Jets as a playoff contender, blah, 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 all of our success is riding on the heels, literally, of a 40-year-old quarterback who just had a torn Achilles. So with all those hater arguments laid out there, Paul, what are your thoughts on how much this team has improved this offseason and where you think, state of the union of this roster going into next season before the draft?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm so tired of hearing on paper. I'm so goddamn tired of it. It was 4 years ago that we heard ad nauseum for an entire year the Jets are bereft of talent, right? Like that nobody knew what the word bereft meant before 2018. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to talk about how the Jets were bereft of talent. It was on every channel, every talk show, every radio show was the Jets are bereft of talent. And that was during the Adam Gase years. And now that we're not, now it's on paper, right? It's all on paper. And when you hear other teams making moves in the offseason, you don't hear about how it's on paper, even though it's on paper for everyone, right? Like, unless we're going to go out and play a UFL game against the Memphis Showboats next week and like show what we got, like, that's it. All we can do is see what we've done on paper. And so it's just annoying to me that because it's the Jets, and by the way, like you're right. And when you laid it all out like that, I almost had to go on mute because I was about to start laughing because when you lay it all out like that, like it's hilarious. And it is very Jets to like, yes, we did all of these things, but all of them have like major, major concerns associated with them. But because it's the Jets, everybody is saying, well, not so fast, right? It's all on paper. A lot of things still need to go right for them. And like, that's true for every NFL team every season. It's like, you need to stay relatively injury free. You need to have your guys have better seasons than their career average. Like that's true for everybody, right? But because it's us, we get this catchphrase tagged to it. And all of a sudden now that catchphrase has caught fire. Again, just like bereft of talent was on paper is being said by everybody. And I'm already tired of hearing it. And we're not even at the draft yet, right? We have several months before a meaningful down is ever played. We have several months before an unmeaningful down is ever played, right? So like a lot more of this to hold on to here. But what I will say is this: we go from the bereft of talent years to now. And has it been a smooth trajectory to get here? No. Has it been a smooth ride to get here? No. But when you factor in what we've done this offseason, minus the first day of free agency or the first few days of free agency, which were a scary, scary ghost town for a couple days, all of a sudden we are in like a significantly better place. And I was struggling for some way to put my arms around it other than just like the eye test and my opinion. And I think part of this too is that if you almost like in your mind convince yourself that the Aaron Rodgers trade also happened this offseason, right? Like because that's a person that by all like measures never played for the Jets, right? The 4 plays didn't count. He didn't complete a pass, right? Like he barely even attempted a pass because he couldn't get the ball off. So if we factor that in, right? Like this roster is so much better than what was getting trotted out last season. And if we can rewind our heads back to going into last season, it was the Jets are insanely talented. The odds for them to win the Super Bowl were like 9-1 at one point. And people were all over how talented this roster was. And like, spoiler alert, it wasn't that talented. They sucked, right? They sucked pretty much across the board, except for a few spots which haven't been swapped out. Most of the defense was good, obviously. We don't even need to address that. Obviously, I'm talking all about the offense here. So I'm like thinking about this, and you and I are trying to figure out what to talk about. And I'm trying to figure out like how can we get something in here that's not my opinion or not the eye test, right? And so I'm going through profootballreference.com, which is like one of my favorite websites to be on. And I'm looking for like something that can assign some kind of value. Something like WAR in baseball, right? WAR is not a perfect stat, but it at least helps you get a gauge for like somebody's value on a team. And so there's a stat on Pro Football Reference called approximate value, AV. I've seen it every time I've gone to that website for the last, 15 years, and I've never really paid that much attention to it because I just didn't really know what it meant. So I dove into it and I read a little bit about it. And essentially, it's an attempt by them to go across positions and assign an approximate value that is imperfect to a player for any given season. So there's no like AV for a career, right? It's season by season and it's approximate value. And so just on our offense alone, at quarterback, we went from an AV of 5 to 15, and that's obviously Wilson to Rodgers. I also, just as a bonus, I put in Tyrod too. He's a 5. So we essentially stayed flat at backup. So obviously this is not a perfect stat. But we went from 5 to 15 at quarterback. At left tackle, we went from 5 to 12, left guard 4 to 8, center 2 to 4, right guard 1 to 5, right tackle 2 to 8, and wide receiver 2, we went from 2 to 11. I left out running back, tight end 1, and one other guy. Who else did I leave out?
A different wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I guess wide receiver 3 was the other one I left out. But so the players that I accounted for in here, wide receiver 1 is the other one I left out. I'm sorry. I only did 2 wide receivers. So I left out Garrett, Brees, and Conklin because they're staying.
Sure.
And so this approximate value, like we went from that group of players, we went from 21 to 63. So by this kind of admittedly imperfect stat, we tripled our offensive value with a series of like pretty budget friendly moves. And on defense, Huff is a 2, Reddick's an 8. And by the way, for all these approximate values, I took their most recent season. So 15 isn't Rodgers' best season. It was just his last season. And I did the same across the board. 12 was not Tyron Smith's best season. It was his last season, and so on and so forth. So Huff, we went from a 2, probably because he was situational. He wasn't out there a lot. Reddick's an 8. Whitehead is a 6, which was the best season of his career. Chuck Clark was a 7 in the last season he played in Baltimore. Al Woods was a 1. Quentin Jefferson was a 7. Lekai Fotu was a 3, and Kinlaw was a 4. So at every single spot that we replaced in the starting lineup with a free agent or a trade acquisition, we upped in value with the one singular exception of Jefferson to Kinlaw. That is literally the only addition we made where we did not improve ourselves. So this team is, without a doubt, on paper, so much better than the roster was last year. And when we went into last year, we were 9-1 to win the Super Bowl. I'm not saying it means anything. I'm just saying that there is a legitimacy to this team and this offense and the way it's been built this offseason. Like, we could potentially be good. And I'm tired of hearing the on paper stuff. I'm very much looking forward to playing a game. I think if I were Bob Saleh and I was looking for a creative t-shirt to hand out to everybody and a phrase to put on a million walls this year, since that's something he seems to like to do, a paper planes, put them everywhere, because these are the paper jets, and let's go out and win some games. So look, I mean, I try not to be overly positive about the team. I try not to be overly negative about the team. I think that's what most people appreciate and like about Badlands in general. And the example that Joe and Connor set is that, like, don't get too high, don't get too low, try to have an objective assessment. And that's what, like, I'm trying to do here is, like, talk myself down a little bit, get off the eye test and try to find some data that backs this up. And you're right, it does hinge on injuries and it does hinge on a lot of what ifs. But if we just get kind of the most recent season out of all these acquisitions, we're looking pretty decent. So I'm curious to see how the paper translates to the field.
I love paper planes. That's awesome. Especially, they should get that MIA song just blasting in the background of like the hype video. That's awesome. And I will say again, I was playing devil's advocate before. It's obviously not my true thoughts. I think the one thing that cannot be overstated is the significance of the improvements on the offensive line. And even, I am not saying that the 5 guys that we list as day one starters right now are all going to play 17 games in a row. It's just not going to happen. But if you get, 15 game consistency out of your bookend tackles, if AVT, who doesn't have to move around positions constantly, can stay healthy and stay at guard for the full year, like, even if you have some injuries along the interior or a tackle misses a few games, but it's nothing major, like, we have the depth now to overcome that. And that is going to change the game so dramatically, especially when you're working with the handicap of an offensive coordinator who doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Like, obviously we need Rodgers to stay healthy as long as possible. So often, like, the improvements on building the wall cannot be overstated.
And also, by the way, we haven't even drafted yet, right? So, like, this is just in free agency, the improvement that's already been made to the team. We have the potential to add an offensive game breaker in round 1. We might not. We might draft another offensive lineman, and that's okay. And I've been long on the record as, like, draft offensive line every single year. But the potential is there to add an offensive game breaker in round 1. So, like, the team isn't even complete yet, right? Like, the paper has not been fully written out. We don't even know what else is coming next. So I just, it's hard. It's hard to be in a 14-year playoff drought where so much of the fan base is so negative all the time. Like, I feel like we need to take a moment and just recognize that, yeah, like, there's been some serious moves made here, and we're not done.
So one last thing before we wrap. You brought up the draft, and I realized we didn't say we were going to talk about this, but it did come out today, a report that the Jets are looking to find a quarterback needing team to trade up to 10, which, no shit. They want a second round or a top 100 pick back was the report. So potentially an additional third, or, a second round pick, depending on how far a team wants to come. In your mind, obviously we know they're doing this because they're looking to recoup a second round pick. But in your mind, do you think this hints at the Jets favoring one position or another in round 1?
Good question. I think it sounds like I think it sounds like they don't think that who they want's going to be there anymore. And whether that's Joe Alt or Malik Neighbors, or, it would be crazy to even be in a world where you think Marv makes it down to 10. So, like, I don't even want to put that name in there. But it sounds like, because I think if I'm them, A second round pick is nice. You want it. That's the right way to build. But if you have the ability to add one of those guys who you can plug into your offense and like year one, they are going to make a difference and they're going to help you make a run. Like you just do it. You do it. You hand in the card. You walk away. You're happy about it, and you say, "F them picks," right? And we'll figure it out when we get there, and maybe we'll try to get crafty in other ways. So I think the other thing that I think is that it's lying season, and this smells a lot like they're chumming the waters for something. And maybe it is that they're looking for a quarterback needy team, or maybe there's an ulterior motive and they're just chumming the water trying to do something else. So could be anything. It sounds to me like it's an invitation to make phone calls to One Jets Drive, and then what happens once that phone is picked up is not something that we know based on this report, right? So what they definitely want to be doing is talking to other teams, and maybe that's to move up, maybe that's to move down, but they're definitely chumming the waters here.
Yeah, I mean that's a rational take on it for sure. I think that's the most, as we talk about being level-headed, that's the most likely option. I do think in talking this out with you, like there's a good chance that they're hearing what is it? Is it Chicago picks right before them, that like maybe they're hearing that all three receivers will be gone. And at that point it's like, well, we need a receiver and we'll be able to get a good one in the second round if we have a pick there. So let's trade back, take the offensive lineman early, and because there's a couple of them that will like if we trade back a couple spots, and still be able to get a wide receiver then later in the draft. Maybe that's sort of the mentality there.
Yeah, and they could be thinking of a specific team, right? Like this could be the pro football version of like subtweeting somebody and
For
just like
sure.
putting something out there, and with something very specific in mind that you want a phone call back, and like
Minnesota.
maybe and then maybe as like a happy accident you get another phone call that you didn't expect to get, right? But it's very much like the pro football version of that.
Totally agree. Well, that's it for us this week, unless Paul, you have any final thoughts before we wrap?
I'm all
No
good.
merch plugs this week?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing our first round of quarter zips are going to be like it's going to be in motion basically tomorrow or today, because this is going to come out Monday morning. So later today, we're going to be going through like our first wave of those. So if you'd like to be in the first wave, get your order in. You're also getting 40% off a ticket to the draft party with a purchase of a quarter zip. So if you're doing that and you're on the fence about the quarter zip, save some money on your ticket and come there, thread it out in a Badlands quarter zip.
Awesome. Thank you guys again so much for listening. We'll be back again next week with another episode. Until then, peace.